Got it going? Okay, thank you. Appreciate that. Okay. So I'm going to read today, Torrin, from Romans chapter 4 to start with. And this is Romans chapter 4 and verse 16. And put that back. And here Paul is writing to the church in Rome. And this is an interesting verse, verse 16. Oh, you know what, Torrin? Is the DVD player still going? Is the power still on?
Yes.
That might be making that noise. Okay, well, I guess it's, I don't know what it is. Yeah, there's something there, something weird in the electricity today. We're picking up some noise from somewhere. But it's okay, we can live with it. So in verse 16, Paul says, "Therefore it is of faith that it might be by grace, to the end that the promise might be sure to all the seed, not only to that which is of the law, but also to that which is of the faith of Abraham, who is the father of us all." Now when he says, "Therefore it is of faith," the "it" that he's talking about is what he's been describing already in this chapter. He's talking about being in right relationship with God, or being in a relationship of favor, in God's favor. Paul uses the word righteousness to describe that, but that's just a word that means being in compliance or right relation, or everything exactly fitting exactly right under God's favor. And that's the "it." He says it is of faith, he says, that it might be by grace. Grace, of course, is a word that means God's gift, or something that is given, standing in contrast to work, not a wage or a reward. So the "it" is God's favor and all the things that come with that. And he says it is of faith. That's our part. In Paul's writings, that's what he describes as the only thing God's looking for on the human side of the equation, is faith. And he says the purpose is, the reason it's that way is so that it can be a gift. Now, if it weren't that way, let's say it this way, God doesn't want it to be something that's worked for, he wants it to be a gift. So in order for it to be a gift, what's necessary on our part is faith. Now when we think of the word faith, we think of sometimes all kinds of things. The word that's translated faith here, let me just give it to you real quick. I looked it up. Faith is a Greek word, pistis. It's a noun, and it means the conviction of the truth of anything, with the idea of trust mixed in. Now, sometimes in the New Testament, Paul and others use the word believe. And believe and faith mean exactly the same thing. Believe is a verb, and faith is a noun. Faith is something you have. In other words, we say have faith. Believe is something you do, but they're the same thing. In fact, almost the same word. In the Greek language, faith is pistis, meaning a conviction of the truth of something with the idea of trust. Believe is a verb, pistuo, which means something you believe to be true, or think to be true, or persuaded of, and have confidence and trust in. So this idea, I think, of trust is the key thought. You see, God wants to give a gift, the gift of his favor, the gift of his blessings. And so in order to give it as a gift and not as a wage, then it's necessary for us to trust him. It's not, in other words, not to work for it, but to just simply trust. The Living Bible, I looked this up. I have my copy of the Living Bible here, and I think it's pretty good. Let me read it to you from the Living Bible. This is verse 16. "So God's blessings are given to us by faith as a free gift. We are certain to get them, whether or not we follow Jewish customs, if we have faith like Abraham's. For Abraham is the father of us all when it comes to matters of faith." I like what it said in the beginning here. So God's blessings are given to us by faith as a free gift, and we are certain to get them. And then he adds, whether or not we're following the Jewish customs. Now, Torrin, you've got the Message there. Let's hear it from the Message translation. I think that's pretty good too. This is why the fulfillment of God's promise depends entirely on trusting God and His way. I like this because it brings this element of trust in. Instead of saying faith, he says trust. And I think that's the key element in faith that we need to bring forefront and center in our minds. It's not like faith is some kind of a magical force, like a spell or something, that not like some energy beam that goes out there and makes something happen. And it's not like a crowbar you put under God to put him in a legal bind where he has to do what you want him to do. None of that's necessary because he's already predisposed to give you his blessings. In fact, he wants it to be on a gift basis. And so what our response to that is to trust him. And I think that's good that the Message brings that out here. This is why the fulfillment of God's promise depends entirely on trusting God and His way. And that's, by the way, I don't mean to keep stopping here, but I just have to say, that's what's really hard about it, We think I'm smart, I know what it should be, but we've just got to sometimes recognize that God's smarter than we are. And that's hard, that's a tough pill to take, but I could tell you so many things in our life and experience. It's frustrating, it's aggravating sometimes, but he's predisposed on the idea of blessings, and he's not holding out, but he's got a way of doing it. And so this is what he's saying here. This is why the fulfillment of God's promise depends entirely on trusting God and His way, then simply embracing Him and what He does. God's promise arrives as a pure gift. That's the only way everyone can be sure to get in on it. But those who keep the religious traditions and those who have never heard of the religious traditions, for Abraham is the father of us all. He's not only our racial father. That's reading the story backwards. He's our faith father. April, do you want to tell that story about it's a gift, or is that too? You want to tell us? She had a story like that one time, and yeah. Well, you can ask her later to tell you that it's a gift story. But the bottom line of it is God is predisposed towards the things that we need, that we care about, the things that are of concern to us, whatever that might be, and He's predisposed to work it out. But the hard thing is what it says in this verse here, trusting Him to do it, and trusting He knows how to do it. We think we know how to do it, but He knows how to do it. Now, sometimes, and I've had this experience, and I know because I tell it all the time, I've had people, now see, we're reading from Paul's letter to the Romans, and I've had conversations with people that say, well, this faith and this believing, this is something Paul invented, Paul the Apostle. This is Paul just dreamed that up, and Jesus never talked about it. I actually had a person tell me that, and I almost fell off my chair when they said that. You can't be serious. I mean, that's really what happened. He said Jesus never mentioned faith or believing. Well, that's just first of all, it's factually wrong, and second of all, the thing of it is, it's not so important to be doctrinally right, to win an argument. I looked it up, by the way. Jesus uses the word faith or believing in Matthew about 10 times, in Luke about 10 times, in Mark about 10 times, but in John's Gospel, either faith or believe in some form is used like 99 times. It's not even true to say that Jesus never mentioned the word, but you see, the bottom line is, it's not important to be doctrinally correct. That's not important at all. What is important is that you're not left out of what God wants you to have. That's the bottom line. If you don't understand things correctly, it cuts you off from you're not able to have what He wants you to have. So I wanted to look at a few passages where Jesus talked about faith or believing and just see what we can observe there. First one is in Matthew's Gospel, chapter 8. And this is a familiar passage, but we can still read it anyway. Matthew chapter 8, and starting with verse 5, Torrin. Matthew chapter 8 and verse 5, back to King James. And when Jesus was entered into Capernaum, there came unto him a centurion, beseeching him. Beseeching, that's just a word to say ask. Asking him. He had a request, in other words. And he said, Lord, my servant lieth at home sick of the palsy, grievously tormented. Now let's just stop right there for a second. We're reading about a Roman centurion. You and I are not Roman centurions, so that's not the essential element here. And he's coming to Jesus with a thing that's of concern to him. His servant is at home sick, grievously tormented. We're not Roman centurions. We don't have servants at home sick, grievously tormented. But that's his concern. See, the lesson we should draw from this as we read is, that was him and his concern, but we have our own situations and our concerns. But let's just see how Jesus responded to him in verse 7. When he came to him with this concern, Jesus said, I will come and heal him. Well, he didn't have to deliberate. I think, see, that's something really beautiful about this. He didn't have to deliberate. He didn't have to say, let me check my calendar. He didn't have to say, let me go pray about this. Maybe it's not God's will. He didn't have to do any of those things. When this man came to him with this concern that was on his heart, Jesus immediately responded in a positive fashion. He said, all right, let's go. I will come and heal him. Again, it's not strictly something that's limited to a physical, sickness or condition. The issue is this man brought his concern to Jesus, and Jesus was immediately predisposed to come and make it right. He said, I will come and heal him. That was, Jesus is a perfect expression of the will of God. And I think one way to apply this is, you see, if Jesus were walking around out here, and we knew where he was, we'd go to his house, knock on the door, and he'd come to the door, and we'd say, well, here's my concern, here's my problem. And he'd say, all right, let's go fix it. That's what he'd say. But he's not here, as you know, and we can't go to his house, knock on the door, but we pray. And when we pray, we believe that God hears us. We believe that he hears our prayer, and we trust that he does. But we should understand that Jesus is the perfect expression of the will of God. And even though you don't hear the voice of Jesus when you pray saying, all right, I'll come and make it right, that's his attitude about everything that you pray about, every concern that you have, everything that you bring to him. His response is, all right, let's fix it. Let's make it work. Just like he said to this man. But here, let's go on reading verse 8. The centurion answered and said, Lord, I'm not worthy that thou shouldest come under my roof, but speak the word only, and my servant shall be healed. The reason he said that is he understands and is sensitive to the fact that he is a Gentile. And he's sensitive to the fact that in the eyes of Jewish people in Israel at that time in the first century, the Romans and other Gentiles were regarded with suspicion or as outsiders, or those who were not part of the group or not part of the club or not part of the covenant, and with no real right to come and receive from the God of Israel. And this is an expression of his respect. Now, the Romans were sent to Israel because it was a Roman province at that time, and they controlled it. And they were conscious of the religious traditions and the mindset of Jews. And this man was he's not being mean at all. He's very respectful of Jesus, and that motivated him to say, I'm not really worthy because I'm a Gentile, in other words. And so he says, you don't need to come to my house because I'm not worthy for you to come to my house. But here's what, just speak the word only, and it will be done. And here's his reasoning. Verse 9 says, for I am a man under authority, having soldiers under me. And I say to this man, go, and he goes, and to another, come, and he comes, and to my servant, do this, and he does it. That's pretty good reasoning. You get what he's saying? He's saying, he says, I'm under authority. That is, I'm under the authority of Rome and the emperor, but I have soldiers under me. And when I say to a man, go, you better believe he goes, because he's under authority. The whole authority of Rome is backing him up. And he tells his servants what to do, and they snap to it and do it. So he's saying, I understand that you, Jesus, are like that, and instead of under the authority of Rome, you're under the authority of God. And if you say to this situation, go, it goes. And Jesus was astonished at what this man said. Look at the next verse, verse 10. When Jesus heard it, he marveled and said to those that followed, verily, I say unto you, I have not found so great faith, no, not in Israel. You see, he expected, it was to be expected that he would find it amongst those in Israel. But he said, I don't find this kind of, what does he mean? Faith, he says. This kind of trust. Do you get the trust that this centurion is expressing in Jesus? He says, I don't even have to see you come to my house. That's how much I trust you. You just say the word and I consider it done. He's expressing his trust. I just wanted to draw out to your attention that aspect of what faith means, that it's an element of trust. And Jesus said, I haven't found this kind of faith, no, not in Israel, where you would expect to find it, Here's something he adds in verse 11. I say unto you that many shall come from the east and the west, and shall sit down with Abraham. We just read about Abraham. Remember that, what Paul said? We are all the offspring of Abraham because of our faith, he said. And Jesus here said, many shall come from the east and the west, and sit down with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the kingdom of heaven. But the children of the kingdom shall be cast into outer darkness, and there shall be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Now, I can't read over this without commenting on it and say, please understand what he said exactly in the context in which he said it. I know sometimes people get alarmed when they read this and get scared and say, well, he says the children of the kingdom shall be cast into outer darkness. Well, let me tell you, he's not talking about Christians. No Christians will ever be rejected in any way, shape, or form. There weren't any Christians at this time. The word had not even been created. There were no Christians yet. There are no Christians until after the death and resurrection of Jesus. The children of the kingdom that he's talking about here are those that he talked about in the previous verse where he says, I haven't found this kind of faith in Israel. And he says, and you know what? People like this man are going to come from far away, east and the west, and they're going to believe like this man did. And because of their faith, they're going to sit down with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in God's kingdom. But those who I should have found this kind of faith, but I didn't, they're going to find themselves on the outside. And again, verse 12, don't read more into it than he said. He's not throwing them into hell. He didn't say they're going to go to hell. He said they're going to be in darkness. That is an expression that is used in the Old Testament prophets to describe the Gentiles. The Gentiles sit in darkness. He says there's going to be a reversal. The Gentiles are going to believe, and they're going to come in, and these stubborn first century Israelites who didn't believe are going to find themselves on the outside because they didn't believe. It's a very sad thing. John said that he came unto his own and his own received him not. Now, I don't mean to be mean or harsh, and Paul says if they change their mind and believe, well, then they'll be accepted too. He's not rejecting anyone, but you got to the ticket is faith. That's the human response. They didn't believe him, and they didn't, by and large, trust him or place their faith in him. And that's who he's talking about here. So he's still marveling about this Gentile, this Roman centurion who came and just, you might say, out of the blue with no expectation. He just believed him with such confidence and trust and reliance. I'm using all those words to strike you because that's what this Roman centurion did. And here's what he said to him. Verse 13. Jesus turned to the centurion and he said, Go thy way, as thou hast believed, so be it done unto thee. And his servant was healed from the selfsame hour. Now, that centurion did not have the power to heal that servant. He did not have the capacity. He did not have the means. He didn't have the power to do it, or he would have done it. But God's got the power. Jesus has got the power. So this man came and expressed his trust and his confidence and his reliance on Jesus. And Jesus said, as you have believed, as you have trusted me, so let it be done. You see, the power is on on the side of God. Jesus can make it work. God can do it. But our part is to believe. The centurion's part was to trust. To say, yes, I trust you to do it. I'm relying on you to do it. And you notice he didn't have to see it done. He even told him that, I don't have to see it. I don't have to have you come to my house. Just say the word and it'll be done. And Jesus said the word, and here the narrator says, and the servant was healed in the self-same hour. Let's look at another passage that's kind of weighs on this or is interesting. Again, the lesson to draw from this is that number one, Jesus cares about the things that are of concern to us. You see, again, we're not in the condition of this centurion. We don't have a servant at home sick, but we got other concerns. We've all got our own issues and things that are of concern to us. But the bottom line is, what was impossible for the centurion was possible for God, and he simply came and said, I trust you to do it. And that was all. Here's another one. We've turned the page, Matthew chapter 9. Here's another story like this. Matthew chapter 9, verse 27. Now, there's so many others that we're skipping over here. They're all good. You know, as Janet was talking about earlier, he came to the crowds and he had compassion on them, and people were healed, and he cast out demons, and he was fixing everything that was wrong. And they came to him, and he just responded. He never turned anybody away. And those are all really good. We could read those, but I just want to focus on these where the word faith or believing is used. And it's not just to prove the point that Jesus used the word faith and believing. That doesn't matter. You know, like I said, it doesn't matter to be correct about it. What matters is to get the lesson from that, to get the point of why it is that way, why it is by faith. And Paul told us why it is. It's so that it can be by gift, so that it can be purely a gift of God, that we simply come and say, I trust you to do it. Verse 27, Matthew 9:27. And when Jesus departed thence, 2 blind men followed him, crying and saying, Thou Son of David, have mercy on us. Well, they came to the right place. Verse 28, And when he was come into the house, the blind men came to him. And Jesus saith unto them, Believe ye that I'm able to do this? So he's asking for them, in a way, he's like trying to center them on the essential thing here. He knew what they needed. You know, it was obvious. And they were saying, have mercy on us. But it's more than him just, hitting them on the head with a miracle stick, There's an openness on their part that is necessary. And so he asked them, do you believe? Believe ye that I'm able to do this? And they said, yes, Lord. Let's rephrase it. Do you trust me to do this? Let's think of it that way. Do you have confidence in me that I can do this? See, that's the way we should understand it. Do you trust me? Do you have confidence in me that I can do this? And that's a good question, isn't it? A question we could ask ourselves sometimes. And I hope the answer is like there, yes. Yeah, we should all say, yes, we do have confidence. We trust you can do it. And then he touched their eyes, saying, according to your faith, be it unto you. And verse 30 says, their eyes were opened. And Jesus straightly charged them, saying, see that no man know it. He was trying to keep it on the down low, I guess, or keep it under wraps at this time, I suppose, is why he said that. But notice he said, according to your faith, be it unto you. He didn't withhold anything from them. He didn't say, well, let me go and pray about this. Maybe it's not God's will. He was there to bring God's blessings, to bring people in contact with the blessings that they needed. But what they brought to it was their trust or their confidence or their reliance or their faith or their believing. All those words mean the same thing. Let's look at another one. There's so many of these in the Gospels. You could spend all day just reading these. There's really so many. It's just remarkable. In Mark's Gospel, chapter 5, there's a couple of good ones that are sort of packed together, almost like back to back. This is Mark chapter 5, verse 22. And so Jesus is going about his business and bringing people into contact with the blessings that God wants everybody to have. And it said, behold, there cometh one of the rulers of the synagogue, Mark 5:22, Jairus by name. And when he saw him, he fell at his feet and besought him greatly, saying, my little daughter lieth at the point of death. I pray thee, come and lay thy hands on her, that she may be healed, and she shall live. And Jesus went with him. See, it's just like the centurion. When the centurion told him, my servant is lying at home sick of the palsy, Jesus said, all right, I'll come and heal him. And so the same thing here. The man came and said, my daughter is at home sick, and Jesus, okay, let's go, you know. He didn't have to say, better pray about it, give me a week, you know, let me fast for a while, let me consider this. No, he knew already. He was there to bring God's blessings to everyone, anyone who would come and receive it and ask for it. So he went with him, and much people followed him and thronged him. But then we have this other situation that happens before he gets there. It said in verse 25, a certain woman which had an issue of blood 12 years and had suffered many things of many physicians, and had spent all that she had and was nothing bettered, but rather grew worse. It's not an unheard of situation, and not to be hard on the physicians. I'm sure they did in their day exactly what they thought was right. But here she's come to the end of the rope, end of her rope. There's nothing more to try. The physicians have done all, and she's not any better. In fact, it says worse. But when she heard of Jesus, it says she came in the press behind. The press meaning all the people, this big crowd of people, and touched his garment. For she said, if I may touch but his clothes, I shall be whole. That's what she said to herself. Like Janet was talking about earlier, those crowds that gathered to Jesus, she heard of him. She must have heard. That's all we can say. She had heard of his reputation. She had heard stories, evidently. The text doesn't tell us, but I think it's obvious. She had heard of Jesus, and so she said to herself, if I can just get close enough and touch his clothes, that's all I need. And that's what she believed. Again, her reliance or her trust or her confidence was in Jesus, and she said, if I can just get that close to him, that'll be enough. And so it said that she came and touched his garment, and verse 29, it said, straightway the fountain of her blood was dried up, and she felt in her body she was healed of that plague. But she's not the only one that felt something. Verse 30 said, Jesus immediately, knowing in himself that virtue, that word virtue is a translation of a Greek word meaning power, dunamis, from where we get our word dynamite. He felt that power, he was conscious of that, and he knew that he didn't initiate it, but he wasn't mad about it, but he was conscious, you see. He knew in himself that virtue or power had gone out of him. So he turned around in the press, in this crowd, and said, who touched my clothes? And, he's in a crowd. I don't know if you've ever been in a crowd, but if you know what it's like you're packed in like sardines and everybody's touching you. And that's what the disciples said in verse 31. The disciples said to him, you see the multitude thronging thee, and sayest thou, who touched me? In other words, they couldn't believe it. What do you mean, Jesus, who touched me? Everybody's touching you, That's what they're saying. They were just packed in there, and everybody was surrounding him. But somebody touched him and believed, or had reached out to him with their faith, or with their trust, or with their confidence in him. Others were touching him, you might say, indifferently in the crowd, but this woman deliberately reached out to him with her need, with her problem, with her concern. And the disciples said, you say, who touched you? Everybody's touching you. Verse 32, but he was not ready to give up yet. He looked around to see her that had done this thing. He's trying to figure it out, and he's looking around because he could tell somebody received something, but he wanted to have a word with them. It's not that he's mad, but he wants to, why he did this? He wanted to confirm it. He wanted to make it secure. He didn't want it to slip. He wanted her to have it, you see, and he wanted to clarify the fact that you've got it and it's yours. The woman, fearing and trembling, she was afraid he was mad, you see. She thought she'd done something wrong. and she knew what was done. She came and fell down before him and told him all the truth. And he said to her, "Daughter, thy faith hath made thee whole." Now you remember when I read to you the definition of faith. I said it's a noun, and it's a Greek word, pistis. It means something you are persuaded of and something you have confidence in. Now she was persuaded of the fact that Jesus was able to make it right. But then, not just that, she had confidence. That was mixed in with it. That's what faith is, not just persuasion of something, but the element of trust or confidence. She deliberately placed her confidence or her trust and her reliance in Jesus. She was convinced or persuaded, and she said, I trust him to do this. If I can touch his clothes, it'll be done. He said, "Daughter, your faith has made you whole." He attributed it. Now, see, we read in the text that it's power that flowed out of him. But he wanted her to consider the fact that because you believed this, because you reached out with your trust and your confidence in me, that's why this blessing has come into reality in your life. Go in peace and be whole of your plague. And he pronounced this, benediction on her, this blessing on her. Well, meanwhile, Jairus is just standing there. I'm sure he's looking at his watch thinking, my daughter is at home sick. Remember her? We forgot about her. He's the one who started. Jesus is on the way to her house. And here this woman has come, and Jesus took time to deal with her. And it says in verse 35, while he yet spake, there came from the ruler of the synagogue's house certain which said, Thy daughter is dead. Why troublest thou the master? I was going to read you some other verses. I had these printed out here. Verse 34, where Jesus said, Daughter, your faith has made you whole. I was going to read you this from the Complete Jewish Bible. It says, Daughter, your trust has healed you. Go in peace and be healed of your disease. I like that because this one translation brought out that word trust. Anyway, so here we're on with the story. While yet spake, verse 35, there came from the ruler of the synagogue's house certain which said, Thy daughter is dead. Why troublest thou the master any further? They brought this negative report. But as soon as Jesus heard it in verse 36, the word that was spoken, he said to the ruler of the synagogue, Be not afraid, only believe. In other words, he said, don't give up, just believe. Don't be afraid, only believe. Here this verse is from the Common English Bible. Jesus overheard their report and said to the synagogue leader, Don't be afraid, just keep trusting me. The Message translation also brings this out. Torrin, could you put that up for verse 36? Jesus overheard what they were talking about and said to the leader, Don't listen to them, just trust me. That's pretty good, isn't it? You get what's being emphasized. The reason I chose these two other translations to bring this out to you, what he's emphasizing here is not just that we are persuaded in our minds of a certain truth, but that we actively are trusting him to do it. He says, Be not afraid, only believe. Just keep trusting me. Let's go and read. And he suffered no man to follow him, save Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. When he cometh to the house of the ruler of the synagogue, he seeth the tumult, and them that wept and wailed greatly. And when he was come in, he saith to them, Why make ye this ado, and weep? The damsel is not dead, but sleepeth. And they laughed him to scorn. But when he put them all out, he taketh the father and mother of the damsel and them that were with him, and entered in where the damsel was lying. And he came, and he took the damsel by the hand and said to her, Talitha cumi. That is an Aramaic expression. And I think the reason that the author put those words in is because they were speaking, the language that they spoke was the Aramaic language. And I think, I suppose that the author, Mark in this case, felt that was so to the point, I guess, or so important that he put it in Aramaic. This is Now, this is not a Greek expression, this is an Aramaic expression. And which is, then we have the interpretation, which is, damsel, I say unto thee, arise. And straightway the damsel arose and walked, and she was of the age of 12 years, and they were astonished with great astonishment. Well, no doubt about it, you know. I would be too, you would be too. I mean, that would be quite a remarkable thing to see. But Jesus, you know, he's in the business of doing remarkable things. And things that we think are too far gone or too bad, hey, they are for us. You know, let's just be honest. They are too far gone. They are impossible for us, but they're not impossible for him. Here, let's just read one more. This is in Matthew chapter 17 and verse 14. Matthew chapter 17, verse 14. When the multitude, when they were come to the multitude, there came to him a certain man kneeling down to him and said, Lord, have mercy on my son, for he is lunatic and sore vexed, for oft times he falleth into the fire and oft into the water. And I besought him, and I brought him to thy disciples, and they could not cure him. And Jesus answered and said, O faithless and perverse generation, how long shall I be with you? How long shall I suffer you? Bring him hither to me. And Jesus rebuked the devil, and he departed out of him, and the child was cured that very hour. Then came the disciples to Jesus apart and said, Why could not we cast him out? And Jesus is just blunt about it in verse 20, because of your unbelief. But listen to this, what he said. If you have faith, now remember how we're defining faith. It means to be persuaded of something and then to trust or to place your reliance. If you have faith as a grain of mustard seed, and I've heard all kinds of different commentary about that. I honestly think he just means something as small as that. A grain of mustard seed is very small. And I think what he's getting at is, even if you just have the smallest degree of trust, you shall say to this mountain, remove hence to yonder place, and it shall remove, and nothing shall be impossible unto you. Now, it is impossible unto you. You can't move a mountain out of its place. But he's saying if you have faith or confidence, even if it's just a small, even if it's in your conception, even if it's just so small that you think it's insignificant, that's all that is necessary. And what is impossible to you is not impossible to God. And what seems hard for you is not hard for God. Not hard at all. But what he's looking for out of you and me is this thing that in the English language we call faith, which is persuasion that he's able to do it, and trust that he will, and confidence in him to do it. Let me just read one more that bears on this, and just to strike your thinking with it, because I like this. This is in Romans chapter 4, and I think I'm just going to skip the King James. Romans chapter 4, verse 1, and you know, that's where we started. We started in Romans chapter 4, verse 16, but now we're going to go to verse 1, and I'm just going to have Torrin put it up in the Message translation. And so let's just get this thought. I like this. Now we're coming back to Paul. You know, we started with Paul, then we saw that Jesus and Paul are just in perfect harmony on the subject of faith and believing. Jesus had a lot to say about it too. And here we're back to the Apostle Paul again. So how do we fit what we know of Abraham, our first father in the faith, into this new way of looking at things? Well, good question, you know. This is a new way of looking at things. Was then, and frankly still is now. So let's get the next verse. If Abraham, by what he did for God, got God to approve him, he could certainly have taken credit for it. But the story we're given is a God story, not an Abraham story. Now you remember, by the way, where this line of thinking is going, because we read it to begin with, where in verse 16 where Paul said, therefore it is of faith, so that it might be by grace. In other words, for it to be a gift, what's necessary on our part is to rely on him to give it, to rely on him to do it. Otherwise, it's us doing it. But it's a gift, so it's got to be him doing it. So what we have to do is just say, yes, I trust you to do it. If Abraham, by what he did for God, in other words, he didn't work for it, see, he didn't come into God's blessings by anything he did. It says he could have taken credit for it, but the story we're given is it's God's work, not our work, in other words. Okay, next verse. What we read in Scripture is this. Abraham entered into what God was doing for him, and that was the turning point. He trusted God to set him right instead of trying to be right on his own. See, the key thought here is that when God came to Abraham, do you remember the story? God came to Abraham and he said, I have made you the father of many nations. And Abraham was an old man with no children, and his wife was old with no offspring and barren to boot. And nevertheless, when God came with this seemingly impossible thing, it said Abraham believed God, and God counted that to him for, there's this word righteousness, or being in rightness, or being in compliance, or being in right relationship, just being where you're supposed to be, where God is concerned. God said, that's good enough for me. You believe me? Obviously, Abraham had no way of making that be true. It had to be God doing it, you see. Abraham entered into what God was doing for him, and that was the turning point. He trusted God to set him right instead of trying to be right on his own. The next verse is what I wanted to get to. Go ahead. I guess the one after this. If you're a hard worker and do a good job, you deserve your pay. We don't call your wages a gift. Okay, let's get the next one. Listen to this. This is what I want to get across. But if you see the job is too big for you, see, that's what we got to see. The job is too big for us, whatever it may be. In all those cases that we read about, the centurion that came with his servant that was sick of the palsy, that was too big for him. So he had to trust Jesus to do it. The blind men, that was too big for them. They had to trust Jesus to do it. The woman with the bleeding issue, she had spent everything on the doctors. It was too big for them. It was too big for her. She had to trust Jesus to do it. Jairus, that was really a big one. His daughter was sick, and by the time Jesus got done with the woman with the issue of blood, she was dead, and that was a really big one. Too big for him, that's for sure. But he had to trust Jesus to do it. So if you see, we don't have any of those situations, thank goodness. We don't, but we've got our own situations. We've got our own things that go on in our lives. But the same thing is true. And so what this translation of Paul is saying, first thing you need to do is see that the job is too big for you. It's something only God can do. If you see the job is too big for you, it's something only God can do, and you trust Him to do it, you could never do it for yourself no matter how hard or how long you worked. Well, that trusting Him to do it is what gets you set right with God, by God, a sheer gift. You see, that applies to everything in the Christian life. You know, Paul said when he was writing to the Romans, the just shall live by faith. Just is a word in English that's a translation of the same word translated righteous, from which we get righteousness. Those who are in this relationship with God that we call righteousness or right with God, Christians in other words, it said they live by faith. It's not just that we believe God and enter in and we believe we're saved and we're now a Christian. We keep on believing Him for all the other things. You know, Paul said it this way, He that spared not His own Son, but delivered Him up for us all, how shall He not with Him freely give us all things? So our part is the same from start to finish, from beginning to end. As Paul said, from faith to faith. It starts in faith, it ends in faith. You know, and it's not like it's some kind of burden. It's not like it's some kind of task or some kind of heavy, obligation on you. It's actually just the opposite. You get to rest and relax and say, okay, it's too big for me. God, I'm trusting you to do it. I can't do it. You've got to do it. And really, that's what faith is. That's what believing is. It's turning it over to Him, saying, I'm trusting you to do it. And I don't have to tell you how. I don't know how, but I'm trusting you to do it. So I'm just going to take my hands off and just say, I believe you to do it, and I'm trusting you. And that's all we got to say about it. So anyway, that's all we got today.